Half-Life 2 was released almost 20 years ago, when virtual reality headsets available for usual mortal humans was a distant dream. But some dreams come true. Half-Life 2 VR mod made the game that was never intended to be playable in VR, playable in VR. In this video, without spoilers, because it's too early to spoil the plot of 19-year-old games, I will tell you about the game world design, progression, combat, and show you how the power of VR can be used to revive old games. This game was around so long that some adults watching this video were not even born. It was one of the most popular games, partially because there were not many games back then, but also because people genuinely liked it. Though some people, like me, never found some spare time to complete the game, which has started to become embarrassing since I couldn't even explain myself why I wasn't able to find a few hours for a very well-received game despite playing video games almost every day. When I finally decided that I cannot live like that any longer, I did some research, which is a fancy way to say Googled, and found out that it can be played in VR. A well-acclaimed game that was recommended by many players now can be played in a way that is way more immersive. Poor bastards that already finished the game could have even more fun if they just waited for some 19 years and that's it. So with a strong feeling of supremacy, I started playing a better version of Half-Life 2. Truth be told, I expected the game to have limitations, because it's an old game. No matter how much you modify it, it was built for computers that were weaker than your cell phone. So of course, graphics looks old, flat, there are not many details or objects in general, and VR features are not as good as in today's games that were built specifically for virtual reality. But nevertheless, all basic features are working perfectly. Controllers are vibrating when shooting or hitting something, the weapons menu is changed to be comfortable in VR, you can pick up and throw various objects with your virtual hands, weapons reload is reworked to be more immersive and involves at least few basic steps, such as ejecting the magazine and loading the new one. The only complaint I have is that physics might be inconsistent. Sometimes weapons you carry interact with other objects, and sometimes they just go through. Or when picking up items with your hand, especially big items, it's hard to move them in a way I want. Upon release they just randomly turn and jump, so end up falling in a different spot than I intended. But that's for the most part a minor inconvenience. All the basic VR features are working very well. As for the game itself, the main protagonist is Gordon Freeman.
Hell, Gordon Freeman!
A scientist that eventually became one of the leaders of resistance that fights alien invaders. He single-handedly fights waves of enemies using a wide range of weaponry, including a gravity gun that allows to use surrounding objects to his advantage. The game will lead you through a series of zones. In each of them you have to unlock the way forward by climbing somewhere, activating something, shooting someone or solving a puzzle. Pretty much every location is infested with enemies and even more of them are spawned as you progress in each zone, so the player is almost always defending himself and looking for ammunition crates or hidden supplies. Each location is made to be as different as possible. Sometimes you go through buildings, sometimes travel on boat or drive a car, sometimes shoot vehicle-mounted guns, control machinery, you might need to fight zombies in dark sewers or humans in plain daylight, and occasionally fight bosses. In some areas you will find friendly NPCs that will push the storyline forward. Since all zones are so different, the player does not become bored, and it's always exciting to see what the next location will have to offer. Throughout the game, the main character doesn't become stronger. There are no levels or equipment upgrades that you could do. The only way the protagonist becomes more powerful is that as you reach certain areas, new weapon types might become available and you can stack up ammunition for them.
Who's going to be the lucky one to carry it into combat? Ah yes, Gordon Freeman.
Combat, for the most part, is quite simple, pointing the gun at enemies and firing. But you can use your surroundings, such as flames or explosive barrels, if you want to approach the battle more strategically. And of course, the gravity gun can be very useful when you want to save bullets, build barricades, or as a mobile cover when holding something big between you and enemies. Another thing I noticed is that combat becomes way slower in VR. Reloading or switching weapons mid-combat is more complicated and you cannot just aim for headshots so easily. So completing the game took longer than I expected. But don't let that confuse you. Despite the gameplay feeling slower, it is still way more engaging because of VR. I would like to add that for someone who already played the game, I would still recommend trying it once again in VR, because it allows you to rediscover old game in a whole new way and feel the scale of the world that always gets lost when playing on a flat screen monitor. I find it difficult to rate this game's features because, of course, old games will be worse in almost all aspects. Even very good games, despite the updates and mods, won't be able to stay relevant for 19 years without major changes to game's engine. Even the storyline is impacted by the game's age. Despite all the story twists and dialogues, it's hard to relate to characters when their facial expressions barely change. NPCs don't look relatable, they look creepy. And their interaction with the game world for the most part are limited to moving around the area and sometimes holding objects. Nevertheless, with VR technology, it's still worth to experience the story yourself rather than watching a summary on YouTube. Storyline? 7 out of 10. The gameplay is the part that VR mod has affected the most. It introduces a more immersive way to interact with the game. Despite the game having only basic VR features, it's not so far behind when compared to recent games. So, unsurprisingly, I think gameplay was the most exciting feature of this game. Gameplay? 8 out of 10. Replayability is almost non-existent. As already mentioned, there are no levels or upgrades and the story is linear. Unless you are trying to do a speedrun or downloading mods with additional content, once you finish the base game, there is no reason to do that again. Replayability? 1 out of 10. Thanks for watching, have a nice day, have fun with a gravity gun, and probably it's not worth waiting 19 years to play a game.